Hello, today is Wednesday, April 28th, 2021. I'm Joe Schmidt from TC2, and this is Staying Connected. If you're a savvy buyer of technology, you know that it's seldom that you just accept the terms of a deal that your vendor offers. You negotiate it. Often you focus on price, but there are a number of commercial arrangements and service terms that can be improved through a spirited negotiation. On today's podcast, I have Ben Fox with me, one of TC2's managing directors. And what Ben and I are going to do is have a bit of a chat about what makes a good negotiator. Hey, Ben, thanks for joining me. So why don't you start us off?
Hi, Joe. Yeah, happy to start us off. I think one of the things I'll start off by saying is we forget, I think, at TC2 just how much of our time we spend negotiating because we actually don't talk about it that much. I think largely because negotiating is just such a kind of inherent part of our work. I remember I got reminded of this a few years ago when my kids were a little bit smaller. And, as you do at the end of the day, you ask your kid, how was their day at school, etc. Kid said, yes. And one of my kids then asked me, he said, Dad, did you win all of your arguments at work today? I was a little taken aback, I suppose. But of course, I work from home like everyone at TC2. So the kids hear those muffled conference calls through the door. I suppose most of what they'd been hearing that week had been negotiation calls. So I did try to explain that I wasn't arguing. I was negotiating. And that's not the same. But of course, sometimes, Joe, as you know, sometimes it does seem very similar.
Come on, Ben, you're British. Everything that you say sounds kind and gentle and intelligent. But seriously, we've both worked with many good negotiators over the years. Our colleagues at TC2 and LB3, clients that we're working with, and honestly, many of the vendor folks that we sit across the table from when doing these deals. So what do you think are some qualities of a good negotiator?
What are some qualities of a good negotiator? Well, firstly, I think good negotiators simply, they like negotiating. And I think not everybody does. In fact, in particular, I think some people certainly don't necessarily like leading a negotiation or being that focal point, if you will, of the negotiations, even if they enjoy participating and being part of the negotiations and, if you will, being a vocal wingman. But I think good negotiators, it's just they like doing it. It's kind of in their DNA, and they always want and are proactive about taking a lead in negotiation and being that focal point. I think there's also a bit of an art to being able to ask for or demand something that perhaps is really a bit of a stretch, and yet being able to present that demand in a very credible manner, not least because I think losing credibility is one of the quickest paths to a failed negotiation, if you will. And after that, I'd say that the common trait in all of the really good negotiators I've worked with and I've been across from is that they all prepare exceptionally well. I think good negotiators always know their subject matter, always know the issues at hand inside out. They're never shooting from the hip, just coming in and kind of being this big negotiator and winging it. And I think that aspect of being a good negotiator, all that preparation, I think that's often glossed over, actually, because everyone focuses on the more glamorous negotiation interaction itself. But I think good negotiators know that it's partly the delivery of the messages, but that you really can't succeed if you haven't done all of your homework.
Yeah, I think that's definitely right, that, you need to be prepared. You have to do your homework, and that's what makes a good negotiator. We spend a lot of time at TC2 preparing for negotiations and also preparing our clients for the negotiations. If it's making sure that the details of the issues are understood, really important, confirming that the whole team has a consistent shared position on the issues, or making sure that we have all the data to support whatever our positions are in a negotiation. And I think part of the preparation for a negotiation is making sure that you have good data regarding what your supplier will probably be willing to agree. Now, Tony Mangino and I, we recently discussed that on another podcast about benchmarking. So I encourage you to check it out if you haven't listened to it yet.
Definitely agree with that, Joe. I think getting benchmark data and market input on what the supplier or whoever you're across the table from, what they're likely to be willing to agree to, is definitely something that we see good negotiators seeking out. I think that's all part of seeing a negotiation from the point of view of the other party, which is also something that I think all negotiators work hard to understand. I think it's so easy to be so preoccupied and focused on your own position that you don't necessarily think through why the other party doesn't agree with what you want. So I've certainly always found that a collaborative negotiation style that really tries to understand the interests that both parties are seeking to protect is the most successful negotiation approach. I think it can be so easy to miss a solution to a particular thorny issue simply because neither party is truly understanding what's important or what's objectionable to the other side. So packing the issues as much as possible is really important and very helpful here, rather than simply constantly finding different ways of articulating the same ask or the same point of view with no success.
So, Ben, what about leverage? We talk a lot about leverage, how to create it, how to maximize it. I mean, it's really just so important to know what effect your leverage has in a negotiation and how to use that leverage during the negotiation. I think good negotiators have an intimate understanding of their negotiation leverage.
Oh, certainly. I think that's very true. And I think assessing your leverage for a negotiation is a key part of that preparation work we spoke about. I think good negotiators they kind of hone the positions they take based on the leverage they have. And I think good negotiators also know when they've pushed as far as they can in light of that negotiation leverage. I also think successful negotiators always maximize the leverage too. And I think that's a skill that really comes to the fore when you don't have much leverage. I think that sometimes it can be easy, it can be tempting to almost give up in a negotiation where you don't have much leverage, where in reality, it's never completely one-sided and leverage kind of ebbs and flows a bit through a negotiation. And so working hard to, one, find those levers, and then two, selectively and wisely choose the right issues to apply those levers to. I think that's certainly a skill I see in good negotiators.
Okay, so we've talked about the background work and preparation that astute negotiators put in. But what about the general spirit of a negotiation?
Well, I think it goes without saying that certainly quick thinking and the ability to quickly digest information are common traits of good negotiators. The ability to quickly understand and process the implications of different deal points as they evolve during a negotiation is important, not least in the context of what, in our world of big IT deals, these very complex, multifaceted deals with all sorts of interrelated issues. And of course, excellent communication skills, being attuned to reading signals and reading between the lines of what the other side says are obviously very important. But I think so too is the discipline of really listening to the other side, rather than simply when the other side is talking, rather than simply thinking about what's my next point I'm going to be making and not really listening to what they're saying. I think good negotiators always listening to what the other side is saying and making sure they're understanding that fully, not just thinking about the next thing they're going to say. I definitely see, to that point, a lot of negotiations where it's clear that some of the participants, some of the negotiation team members, they're not really listening. They're not really trying to understand the other side's interest. And they kind of get stuck on their own issue and their own point of view. And I think when that happens in negotiation, it just ends up getting stuck in a rut if you're not careful. I think one of the other things I've also learned over the years is the importance of being willing to caucus during a negotiation. I think sometimes it seems very disruptive to pause a negotiation and step away for an internal discussion. But actually, that's often necessary and really important to get through particularly difficult issues. I certainly remember early in my career, I was a junior member of a negotiation team for a large outsourcing deal. And it was led by a senior executive from the company that we were supporting. And this senior guy said at the very start of the negotiation in the internal meeting, he said that anyone on the team, however junior, should feel comfortable to call a caucus at any time if they felt that would be necessary or helpful to the negotiation, and I remember doing so. And I've always remembered that as a good practice for negotiations. I think it's particularly important in negotiations for these large IT deals where it's really a team-based negotiation. It's not a one-man negotiation, if you will.
That's great input, Ben. I also think it's important to remember that one of the most important skills that a good negotiator has to have is the ability to actually close deals.
Oh, yes, that's a great point. I think having the vision to find a path to close a deal, rather than just continuing to negotiate for ever diminishing returns is a crucial skill. And I actually think a key part of the role that we play at TC2 in negotiations is to help our client and sometimes both sides find those compromises and solutions to the issues that are needed to get the deal or contract across the line and avoid those protracted negotiations that everybody hates and really serves no one. And I think sometimes the hardest task actually is to justify what things should actually be conceded. Joe, I know we're running out of time. So my final input on this discussion is that I think all good and all experienced negotiators are kind of smart enough to know it's not really about outsmarting or out-negotiating the other side. I think there's a cliche that a negotiation is a chess match. But I always think that a chess match is kind of the wrong way to think about it because a chess match has a winner and a loser. And negotiations, particularly in our world, in IT and outsourcing, they're not really about a winner and a loser. It's the wrong way of thinking about it. To me, when I'm negotiating on behalf of my client, I'm absolutely an incredibly strong advocate for my client's position. But I think, try and have one eye on making sure that the contract is going to be a good deal for everyone and will be the basis for a really positive relationship between the two sides, and one, therefore, that will be a success, and one that will deliver the business outcomes and the services that my client is expecting from this deal. Another colorful character from earlier in my career, he told me that you don't want to be watching a pig turn white. By which he meant watching the supplier bleeding dry, because that's no good for everyone, of course. What he wanted as an outcome was a fair deal that was good for everyone. And I think all good negotiators ultimately have that same focus too.
Okay. Hey, thanks, Ben. This has been a great discussion. Now, if you are about to begin an ICT negotiation and you'd like to bounce some ideas off of Ben or me or any of our colleagues at LB3 and TC2, or maybe you have other ICT needs, please drop us an email or give us a call. You can also stay up to date by subscribing to Staying Connected, by checking out our websites, and by following us on LinkedIn.